I think the title gives a little too much of the film's direction away, so describing it as a cinematic Blair Witch meets The Wicker Man with a cheeky bit of Lovecraft and early Neil Marshall is probably enough to summarise a story about four lads lost in the Swedish woods where bad stuff starts to happen. This obscure British flick starts with a harrowing event that transpires into a modestly introspective horror tale that maintains a brooding level of suspense while subsequently adding a pretty sorrowful overtone as the four men desperately latch onto hope as they struggle to find sanctuary on the other side of the forest. My only knowledge of director David Bruckner are his segments from The Signal, Southbound, and in particular that horrifying succubus story in VHS, so if you know what I'm talking about, you already have a grasp of the kind of film you're likely to get from this. It's a very light plot that's carried on the strength of its execution, the beautiful but haunting cinematography that makes the setting feel cold and desolate and almost physically alive in some respects, the ominous soundtrack I recommend you at least check out if you like The Witch, a cast of humanized and relatable characters, and a threat that definitely has a payoff after a compelling build-up. Like I said, there's an event that occurs at the start that sets the mood and establishes this theme of fear and guilt that's perpetuated throughout, as the horrors of the forest start to take a more personal turn, especially on Rafe Spall's character, who effectively becomes the central figure for the story. The problem is that it ultimately comes at the expense of the other three leads, who seem to have a less engaging and more inferior experience to Spall's character, that I was left wanting there to be more of a balance between how each of them dealt with their own nightmarish ordeal. For example, one character does have a subtle plot thread involving his off-screen wife that's alluded to, but it's not fleshed out enough for it to have that much of an impact. And this is one of several implications between each character that hint at some sort of revelation in the grand scheme of things, but the film isn't entirely clear what it wants to do with that, and while Spall's character arc comes full circle, everything else feels literally still lost in the woods. As I said, this is a British film, so a lot of the characterization and good humour is naturally going to be lost in translation with some audiences. Like, their dialogue is very laddish and vapid, but honestly, that's probably how my friends and I would behave if we were lost in the woods, so it never felt tedious to me, but don't go in expecting some well-crafted, sophisticated script. What's here feels much more organic and helps carry a lot of the film. The dynamic it creates between the group shows the unity in their friendship, but also the tension that lies between them caused by personality conflicts and the obvious strain from the event that catalyzes their trip to Sweden. The Ritual is a simple, traditional horror film. It never attempted to cheaply jumpscare me, thankfully, but the suspense never reached enough of a peak to genuinely scare me. It never hits the extremes of Ben Wheatley's Kill List, for example, and it never explores its themes in too much depth to leave that much of a lasting impression, but overall, it's a creepy little story that leaves a lot to the imagination, especially for those who love speculating over supernatural or otherworldly lore. It's based on the book by Adam Neville, who I only know from seeing his books plastered over the horror section of every British airport, so I can't vouch for the source material, but I really can't stress it anymore. The film really is a British Blair Witch project with a definitive payoff while still retaining an effectively surreal, eerie, and lightly emotional character journey that certainly hints at a desire to be something greater and more unique.